Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is Monday evening, February 4th, 2019. And tonight's topic is a silver cross too heavy to bear. The Democrats' farewell to silver. And tonight's episode is a continuation of the discussion we had last night in the episode called The Cross of Gold. Gold versus silver, silver versus poor. And in that debate, or not a debate, in that explanation, we went through the history of silver starting around the middle of the 19th century, starting with the Coinage Act of 1853. Then we moved on to the Coinage Act of 1873. And the effect of both of those acts was to prevent people from bringing miners and those who had silver to the U.S. Mint and having them made into coins, half dimes, dimes, quarters, half dollars, and dollars. And the Mintage Act of 1853 eliminated the minting of the first of the smaller coins. And then in 1873, they eliminated the ability to bring your silver and mint dollar coins. And what happened during that entire period, that effectively led to a demonetization of silver because the government was not willing to mint coins made out of silver, irrespective of the price. And the reason the Democrats love the idea of this free silver concept, bring your silver in, get it minted into coins, was generally because there had been big finds of silver. The Comstock lode in 1859 in Nevada led to the concept that you can, in a sense, get free money. You can bring it into the government and get more money, more value than the value of the silver, underlying silver in the coin. And that led Democrats to really want to undo the demonetization of silver because they felt that the government should be participating in this type of largesse and giving back to the people. And if you can make silver into money and there was lots of silver, well, then in effect you'd be increasing the money supply, and that would be inflationary. The moneyed interest, the gold people, did not like that. The poor people, the people who had debts that they wanted to inflate away, they liked the idea. I think I referred to that program as cash for clunkers. Very similar, because the idea was that you would bring your silver in and you'd get $1 even if you brought, say, 79 cents worth of silver. And tonight we're going to talk about what happened since then. Before we do that, we have an important Smaulgld product update. So let's take a look at what we're talking about, this new product update. You know, Smaulgld produces mugs. That's in part how we support the show, through donations and through the sale of Smaulgld game-changing mugs. But we have not yet produced a game-changing mug, and we're going to do that. We're going to unveil a new game-changing mug tonight. Limited edition, limited muggage. This is a limited muggage, be available for a short period of time. It is the Smaulgld Gold Game-Changing Mug, and here it is. There is the Smaulgld Gold Game-Changing Mug. But it's not just that it's in gold, but there's another feature to it. On the back, it is written, Smaulgld, famous quote, game changer. There it is. So the Smaulgld Game Over Game Changer mug is now available. Here it says Game Changer, and I'll leave you a link for that one. Again, this is a limited muggage. There'll be further designs, further gold and silver Smaulgld mini muggages. We'll always continue to sell the Smaulgld Classic and Super Classic mugs, but we're going to issue a series of limited muggage, game-changing mugs, game-over mugs, and I hope you enjoy them. Now let me show you how you can buy your Smaulgld game-changing mugs. They're also, it's customizable. That font that you see there, it says Game Changer, you can customize that in about 3 or 4 different dozen types of writing. So if you want something less than standard, you could do all types of italics and bold and middle English and so on just by going to the site and customizing your lettering. So that is the Smaulgld Game Changer mug. Let me give you the link for that then. Of course, you can always go to Smaulgld and buy the classic and super classic mugs that you see on your screen. All right, let's see. Let me give you the link. It's important for you to be able to buy your Smaulgld game-changing mugs. Here it is. It's a little more money than the classic and super classic, but then again, it's because it is mini muggage. It is limited edition mugs, and there'll be a series of silver and gold Smaulgld mugs. They'll all be game changers, though. Okay. Let's get back to our topic. Now, we covered the period of the mid-19th century when silver was being demonetized against the wishes of the populace, the people, the Democrats, who were for the working people, for the people that didn't live on the coastal elite part of the U.S. in the Northeast. They were the laborers. And in 1896, William Jennings Bryan managed to wrest the Democratic Party presidential nomination away from the frontrunner by giving this impassioned speech talking about how the people's interests were just as important as the moneyed interests, and that the business interests of the people in the heartland of the country were just as much business interests of the people in the Northeast. And therefore, he was in favor of returning to the free silver and eliminating the crime of 1873. In other words, he was for not so that people could be independent and go and trade silver on their own. Quite the contrary, he wanted the government to support silver as a monetary metal and thereby be able to increase the money supply, because the United States, I think at the time, Nevada was producing 40% of the world's silver. So all that had to happen was that silver had to be brought to market, brought to the government, made into coins, and you effectively could up the price of silver. So that didn't end it when William Jennings Bryan lost in 1896 to William McKinley. While the Coinage Act remained in place, there were a number of concessions made. This was still a very powerful political bloc. Bryan won that year. Most of the South, most of the middle of the country, just about anywhere rural. But the population centers at the time, Florida was only 4 electoral votes at the time. The big votes were in New York, Massachusetts, all the northeastern states, New Jersey, Maryland. And still, there was this desire to appease the silver Democrats, where they still had some power. So in 1878, someone has a concession, because remember, the miners, and we had all this silver out in Nevada, they clearly wanted the government to take a good portion of it off. I mean, it's one thing to find a lot of silver, but when there's so much silver, it becomes abundant that if there's more than is needed for industry, and remember, they didn't invest in silver back then because it was in the coinage, you need the government or somebody to become a buyer. And they did find that buyer in 1878. The U.S. government agreed to buy and start minting silver dollars again. Peace dollars, they were called. Not peace dollars, Morgan dollars, they were called. And those dollars were minted in abundance starting in 1878. And they minted a good number of those silver dollars from 1878 to 1918. And they were minting a lot of silver coins. So there was a market now, even though there was overabundance of silver being mined in the U.S. U.S. was putting it to good use, buying it, and putting them into silver dollars and other silver coinage. Now, in 1918, while they're still making massive amounts of silver dollars, something happened. The United States got a call from England. I wrote this a while back. I'll read some of it to you. And in what happened was that the English needed silver, and they knew the United States had silver, but they needed it quick, fast, and in a hurry. And they needed it to send to India because it was a colony of theirs and there was a rupee shortage. They didn't have it in their minds, oh, we'll just make up clad rupees, you know, silver and, nickel and copper. No, they had to have the silver, even for their colony. So the Pittman Act of 1918 was introduced by Senator Pittman of Nevada. He had a vested interest in this act, and it provided that 270 million Morgan silver dollars would be rendered into bullion, quote, to act to conserve the gold supply of the United States. So even then, they were still kowtowing to the gold supply, to permit the settlement in silver of trade balances adverse to the United States, to provide silver for subsidiary coinage and for commercial use, to assist foreign governments at war with enemies of the United States, and for the above purpose to stabilize the price of silver and encourage the production of silver. So you can see the silver lobby got in there and they said, we're going to do this, but we want to make sure that when we do this, that this represents an opportunity for us to get a higher price for silver and for us to have to make and keep mining more silver. So the act ostensibly says that, but the real reason was that they wanted to help Great Britain, and they were going to melt down those 270 million Morgan silver dollars and ship them out to England. And so the act itself provided for the sale of about 260 million ounces of silver to Great Britain at $1 an ounce. Now, the price of silver was less than $1 an ounce. But, hey, Britain needed it. They needed it fast. And the United States can make a profit on it. Now, where does Nevada come into this? Well, the agreement was, now you're going to have to go back and mint 270 million more silver, mint 270 million more ounces so we can produce more silver dollars to replace the ones we just melted down. So that ended up keeping the price of silver high because it supported the U.S. mining industry, because those 270 million silver dollars destroyed will be remined using silver from the U.S. mines, and the U.S. had agreed to buy that silver at $1 an ounce, which was again above the market price. So that meant that whatever silver was already being used to mint coinage would now have to go into minting these, reminting the Morgan silver dollars. So under the Pittman Act between 1920 and 1933, silver required to mint another 270 million Morgan silver and then peace silver dollars starting in 1921 was purchased from the U.S. mines at a fixed price of $1 per ounce. So even though the silver lobby had been smacked down and they had demonetized silver, they still had political clout enough to, one, restart the silver dollar program in 1878, two, in 1918, melt half of the ones they'd already made and ship them out to England on the understanding that they would remint another 270 million, which indeed they ended up doing. And when they finished doing it, by 1935, they never minted them again. Now, this caused a problem. This wasn't, and again, it's just like any government intervention, it causes problems or unforeseen circumstances. So as we mentioned, under the Pittman Act, the silver required to mint the 270 million piece Morgan dollars that were melted required the U.S. To buy silver from the mines in Nevada, and they had to buy that at $1 as opposed to the market rate of 86 cents an ounce. And the issue there was all the silver that was going to be mined ended up going towards the production of the silver dollars, because that is what the statute provided, that the U.S. would buy the silver at above market prices in order to mint the new silver dollars. Unfortunately, because all that silver, that's still a lot, even though, remember, you're still restrained by time. You're restrained by the ability of the mines to get the stuff out, to get it back to the mint, to print it up. Look what happened as a result of the Pittman Act. Basically, even though they had so much, remember, they melted down 40 years worth of production. From 1878 to 1918, they melted 270 million silver dollars and in 1918. And then they immediately had to begin to try to refill the coffers. And they did. However, there was one problem, was they didn't count on the fact that they also had to mint dimes, quarters, and half dollars. And if you look at this chart I prepared here, in 1921 to 1923, 95% of the silver that the U.S. Mint used went to produce those replacement Morgan and peace dollars. For example, 1921, they actually made Morgan and peace dollars that year. 87 million total coins were minted that year. Remember, they got to replace 270 million over a certain period of time. That was 67 million ounces. But for half dollars, they only minted 1 million. Only took up 362,000 ounces. Quarters, 1.9 million. They only used 346,000 ounces. Mercury dimes, they only made 12 million. 890,000 ounces. So in 1921, they used 67 million ounces to make silver dollars, and they used about 1.5 million ounces to make dimes, quarters, and half dollars. 1922, it gets even worse. They use 51 million ounces of silver to mint 66 million 1922 peace dollars, and they have no silver left to mint any 1922 half dollars, quarters, or dimes. So if anyone tries to sell you a 1922 half dollar, 1922 quarter, or 1922 dime, don't buy it. It's counterfeit. U.S. Mint did not make silver coinage other than peace dollars in 1922. Wasn't much better in 1923. They still were minting the dollars pretty well, 56 million down from 66 million, using 43 million ounces to do that. Remember, a peace dollar, American U.S. dollar, is about 0.77 ounces. It's not a full ounce of silver. And again, in 1923, they didn't make many half dollars, quarters, or mercury dimes, using about 6.7 million ounces versus 43 million ounces to mint the peace dollars. So that's about 95% of all the silver that went into making coins during those 3 years went into making the peace dollars. Now, you say, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is people are using these coins and transacting. It's not like they can use anything else for 10 cents or 50 cents or a quarter. So these coins not only are rare, and they are, and it's hard to find examples of these dated coins in good condition. Why? Because there weren't that many of them, and they got circulated a lot more than if there had been more coins around. So what was the solution to that? Well, another buyback. Pittman returns, 1934. Says, oh, geez, you know, we had to get the government to buy all that silver to mint the silver dollars that you guys had melted down. We had to replace all those. Well, we got another problem here. You don't have enough coins to to supply the dimes, the half dollars, and the quarters. And the U.S. agreed, and with Pittman, and they passed the Silver Purchase Act, which not only purchased silver, but actually required people in the U.S. to turn in their non-coined silver that they weren't using for industry or personal effects. And the reason for it was they had a silver shortage, not a shortage of silver, but a shortage of silver that was available immediately to mine coins. There was plenty of silver in the world, but there weren't many silver coins. So you didn't have to turn your silver coins in. That wouldn't make any sense because they already understood there weren't that many coins out there to return. They weren't trying to confiscate the silver supply and nationalize it. They were trying to build up a silver stockpile and also to build up enough silver that they can mint copious amounts of coins again. And so that's what they did. And over the course of the next few years, they nationalized, so to speak. The silver that people turned in was about 112 million ounces, but they went on a buying rampage and they purchased an additional 1.53 billion ounces. So what really helped them build, and of course they bought a lot of from the Nevada mines, and the U.S. built up a very healthy silver stockpile. And some of it they bought from China. And China, I was doing some other research the other day, and had nothing to do with silver, just part of my history of economics. And they were talking about in the 16th and 17th century that when Europeans got wealthy and they wanted Chinese goods, the Chinese did not want anything from the West. There was no products that they wanted, so they wanted silver. And they say that of all that, remember, this is a period of time right after the New World had been discovered. You're now into the post-colonial era. A lot of silver is coming back from those mines. They say 40 to 50% of that silver ended up being used in trade and shipped to China. So I guess some of it came back during the 1900s, or early 1900s, 1930s, when the United States then, through the Silver Purchase Act, went global and bought 1.3 billion ounces of silver. That, in effect, became a silver stockpile. And then you'll see the effect that had on the mintages. By 1934, boom! They're not making that many peace dollars. They're not making that many peace dollars in 34 and 35. And that was it. They had hit their limit. They didn't have to make, they front-loaded, which was smart by Pittman. They front-loaded their obligation to mint the silver dollars. So they got that silver out of the ground and shipped to the mint right away and made them, in a sense, make those silver dollars. That was the law. And they just didn't mine enough for them to mint the dimes, quarters, and half dollars. But by 1934, once they had the Silver Purchase Act in place and they were getting money, getting silver pouring in from confiscation, and they paid them fair value, and getting the silver that they bought from all over the world and from Nevada, they had enough silver now to make big amounts of dimes, quarters, and half dollars. And they didn't need to make many more peace dollars by then because they had hit the 270 million. And when they hit the 270 million that they had melted down and replaced them all, that was the last year for making silver dollars, and they continued to make dimes, quarters, and half dollars in 90% silver. And you can also see here, that's why these dated coins are less rare. These dated coins tend to be less worn out. Remember, you look at the older coins, if you listen to Salivate Metal, he's talking about poking through junk silver. If you ever done that, you can see the big difference in 1917, 1918, the earlier dated coins, even if they were in high mintage, because they were minted before the period of time when very few were minted between 1919, 1920, and 1934, the U.S. Mint didn't have much silver, so they didn't mint many coins, so they had to rely on the older coins in 1917, 1918, 1919, 1915. So those coins got far more worn out, and they're only 10, 15 years older. It's not because they're older that they're worn out. It's because there weren't that many coins that followed them, so they had to stay in circulation longer. And that argument doesn't make any sense that they're older. There's some 1878, 1890 Morgan silver dollars that look brand new. Why? Because they minted so many of them, and they didn't get used that much. And many of them were found in bags that were never used. But even the ones that were circulated, a lot of them aren't very well circulated. It's clear you can find them worn out ones as well. But there's far more specimens of the silver dollars from that era, from the 1921 Morgan dollar. You can find very many of them in very good condition. It's hard to find even many 1921 dimes, quarters, and half dollars at all. And then, of course, coins minted before then, the 19, 18, 7, those coins are well worn out. But you could see they, pursuant to the 34 Act, Pittman was evolved again. Another opportunity to sell more silver to the government. This time probably to just to make up for the fact that they hadn't been making the dimes, quarters, and half dollars in the amounts that they needed. And that brings us now to, we went through the World War II and went through Truman and Eisenhower. And now we come into the Kennedy era. And when Kennedy becomes president, these guys are now in circulation, and there's really not been a shortage. The United States has picked up that 1.3 billion ounces in 1934, and there doesn't seem to be a problem with silver. You can see the Kennedy, not the Kennedy, the Ben Franklin half, 1963. You have the Washington quarter, 1963, and the Roosevelt dime, 1963. And that's what you have when John Kennedy was around. But John Kennedy, many do not know, also at the time, before we move on to John Kennedy, there were silver certificates. That was the other concession they made in 1878. Not only would they mint all of those silver dollars, but they would also run a silver certificate program. And those certificates provided from 1878 to 1964 that there would be silver on deposit at the U.S. Treasury, an amount of silver certificates necessary to redeem the face value. So they would issue those in amounts, supposedly with the understanding that any one that they issued would have a corresponding amount of silver. And people could get these and then bring them to their bank. And you know what they got for them? They didn't get 4 quarters or 10 dimes. They got the silver dollar. It was the same concept. And remember, it's not an ounce of silver, it's 0.77 ounces in a silver dollar. But this is what was also a program began in 1878. So you had this silver concept. You had enough of a Democratic silver lobby to keep this in play. FDR was a Democrat as well. Kennedy comes along, and Kennedy is a New Deal Democrat. He doesn't believe in this silver stuff. I'll give you some examples of how Kennedy began the process of demonetizing, finally, the silver from the U.S. monetary system. Now, there's this whole nonsense story, and again, it's all this game changer conspiracy stuff that's incorrect, that Kennedy authorized these guys. And this was some type of direct threat to the Fed. Notice what it says, United States note. It doesn't say federal note. That must have meant that Kennedy was acting against the Fed. Wrong goes star. It's the exact opposite. These notes were also created by statute in 1873. They are not a JFK invention. They were authorized, and they had to keep a certain amount of these notes that weren't silver certificates that came around at the same time that they introduced the silver certificates. And from time to time, they had to update the next issuance of these notes. And Kennedy just happened to be, just as any president, if you're in office at the time and the time comes due, you have to authorize the issuance of notes in order to keep in touch with the statute. In compliance with the statute, you issue the executive order. That's what Kennedy did. Kennedy just said, yes, here's some more U.S. notes. It was not any type of challenge to the Federal Reserve. And I'll show you, in fact, why it's the exact opposite, because that is a red herring, the red note. Those notes were issued, they were issued in 1966 as well, under Johnson, because he had to update the amount of notes to be kept in circulation. There was a certain number that had to be kept in circulation. And when that number was, if the number went below that, then you had to issue another round of them. That's all Kennedy did with that executive order. He was not trying to undermine the Fed. Let me just read you here about the Red Seal note. The last Red Seal note series were issued under the Johnson administration in 1966 in the form of $100 notes to keep within the requirements of the Act of 1874. This was not some kind of John Kennedy, and I hereby go against the Federal Reserve because we want to have debt-free money. Wrongo. He had nothing to do with that. These were statutorily required. He wasn't challenging the Fed, as again, we're going to see. He was actually trying to get rid of the silver certificates, not because it's my inference. I'm going to read you his exact words. He wanted to get rid of the silver certificates. He wanted to get rid of silver. And you know what he wanted to replace them with? Federal Reserve notes. But let me read you this thing about the red seal notes. Now, why were they issued in $100 increments by Johnson? Because he was just trying to use the max. He was trying to get to that number. He figured 100 is the easiest number to use because you have to print less of them. So I say here, if a message had been sent to Kennedy not to challenge the Fed by issuing U.S. notes, it seems Lyndon Johnson missed it. Yeah, of course he did, because it had nothing to do with challenging the Fed. The Act of 1878 requiring U.S. notes to be kept in circulation was finally discontinued in 1994 by the Regal Improvement Act. Now, Jack A.G., Fed killed them, wrongo star, absolutely wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Has nothing to do with the Fed. Again, if you're listening, the Act of 1878 required these notes to be issued. Kennedy did not invent them. He did not challenge the Fed. And you're going to see in a minute, he actually wanted Federal Reserve notes. And we have actual documentation that shows that. He wanted to get rid of the silver certificates. People, once they hear this, Kennedy was killed by the Fed. I hear Lincoln was killed by the Fed. The Fed wasn't even around in 1865. But any event, again, the Act of 1878 required U.S. notes, those debt-free notes, to be kept in circulation. It was not a Kennedy initiative. He was president at the time. Johnson issued them afterwards. If somehow Kennedy wasn't supposed to issue them because he was challenging the Fed, he wasn't, then why would Johnson issue them 3 years after his death? Because he was required to by law. It has nothing to do with challenging the Fed. That is one of those conspiracy theories that's out there. It's wrong. In fact, J. Edgar Griffin, the guy who wrote the Creature from Jekyll Island, actually makes this point, exact point I'm making right here, that Kennedy was not trying to challenge the Fed. There's nothing to indicate he was trying to challenge the Fed other than he issued these notes, but he didn't issue them. They weren't his creation, and Johnson issued them as well. They've been around since 1878, and they didn't go away until 1994. That idea that Kennedy was killed by the Fed makes no sense whatsoever. Any conspiracy about Kennedy, I can listen to. It was his wife. It was the Cubans. It was the Russians. It was the CIA. It was Nixon. It was Johnson. I can believe there's a way of saying, okay, since we don't know for sure, maybe they had a motive. But in this case, he was working for the Fed. And these notes are a red herring. These red seal notes have nothing to do with challenging the Fed. They're just a statutory requirement. And now I'm going to show you why he was for the Fed. Not that he was for the Fed, he was actually against silver. Now, this is shocking to some people, but this is why the silver Democrats lost. This is when the Democrats cut their ties with silver, and Kennedy started the ball rolling in a big, big way. Now, let's take a look now at what Kennedy had to say about silver. A lot of people don't know this. People have this idealized version that John Kennedy was man to people and he wanted silver. No. Economic Report to Congress, January 21st. You can look this up. This isn't me making up stuff. These are words that he said. This isn't rewriting the history. No. 1963. He said, I again urge a revision in our silver policy to reflect the status of silver as a metal for which there is an expanding industrial demand. Except for its use in coins, silver serves no useful monetary function. Silver serves no useful monetary function. That's what he said. Not my words. And he's talking about expanding industrial demand. In 1961, prior to this speech, he had noted, he had directed the Treasury to stop using that silver stockpile as a source of coin making. He said henceforth, silver needed for the mints, meaning to make the coins, should be withdrawn from monetary reserves, meaning demonetize even that portion. Take them out of the monetary reserves, and the monetary reserves were the ones that were backing the silver certificates. He wanted those silver certificates gone and replaced with Federal Reserve notes. Not U.S. notes. Those only had to be kept in circulation in a certain amount by statute, and that's all he did. He said they should be with the silver needed for the mints should be withdrawn from monetary reserves with an equal amount of silver certificates pulled out of circulation at that time. So, as the mint needed coins, Kennedy said, good, you need 30 million ounces of silver to mint coins. Don't take it from that silver stockpile. Take it from the silver that we have earmarked for the silver certificates. And when you take the 30 million of silver out of there, remove silver certificates out of circulation. Now, back to his address to Congress in January 1963. He mentions this act. He says, in 1961, at my direction, sales of silver were suspended by the Secretary of the Treasury. And then he says, as further steps, I recommend those acts that oblige the Treasury to support the price of silver. Same thing. He doesn't want silver to be monetary, and he doesn't want it supported in price. Then he says, I authorize the Federal Reserve System to issue notes in denominations of $1 so as to make possible the gradual withdrawal of silver certificates from circulation and the use of that silver thus released for coinage purposes. So he still believes that silver should be used for coins, but should not be used to back any type of certificates. And he says, I urge the Congress to take prompt action on these recommended changes. That was in January of 1963. His long-standing belief that silver serves no monetary purpose, that those silver certificates should not be backed by a special reserve, and that in order to get rid of that reserve, when the mint needs silver to make coins, take it from there and not from the stockpile. Then, in June of 1963, they acted on that speech. And that's exactly what they did. They started to make arrangements to take the silver away from the silver certificates and just to use it to mint coins. And we're going to see what happens in 1964. In 1964, they ramp up the coin program in order to drive down the amounts that are held by the silver certificates. Kennedy wished to free that silver sitting in the U.S. vaults that was backing the silver certificates in order so that it could be used for U.S. coinage and for industry. And he said in order to accomplish that goal, the silver certificates would have to be withdrawn from circulation and replaced with Federal Reserve notes. He was definitely against that silver certificate program, and that was a throwback from 1878, when the Silver Democrats managed to get all those silver dollars made and to get the silver certificate program in place, almost trying to say, well, yeah, see, silver is still monetized because a certain amount of the U.S. money is backed by silver and with these silver certificates. But again, he had made directions to the Treasury to eliminate that pile. And that's the same thing with his executive order that he said, well, this is what confuses people. Under his order, the Treasury would issue silver certificates against any silver bullion, silver or standard silver dollars in the treasuries not then held for redemption of any outstanding silver certificates. It was a stopgap measure. What he was trying to do was pave the way to retire the silver certificate paper money that was backed by silver as the silver was melted down for coinage. But then those silver certificates were going to be replaced and were replaced buy Federal Reserve notes. And pursuant to the act of the one in the middle of 1963, U.S. Treasury Secretary Douglas Dillon announced in March of 1964, after the Kennedy assassination, that the end of the redemption of silver certificates to coincide with the cessation of the mintage of silver coinage at the end of that year. That was the last year they made silver coinage. That would be the end of the silver certificate program, but they would allow people to exchange those certificates up until the end of 1968. So Kennedy clearly killed the silver certificate program, and it was a two-step process. And here's the second step of the process. This is clear. This is not even under debate, but people want to believe that Kennedy was killed by the Fed because he didn't want debt-based money. Absolute nonsense. What Kennedy then did was, well, he didn't do anything. He died. 1964 comes around. It's not like Johnson just changed course and said, oh yeah, let's get rid of silver. Kennedy had already done it. He had already killed the silver certificate program. He had already ordered the draining of silver from the silver certificate program to go into the mintage of coins because he felt that silver serves, quote, no monetary purpose other than the minting of coins. So 1964 comes around. Kennedy died in November of 1963. So Kennedy is immediately rushed to the $50. And they made a boatload of those in 1964. Look at all the silver coins minted in 1964. Where's the silver coming from? The silver certificate program. It's not coming from the stockpile. They used 550 million ounces of silver. And then in early 1965, they're still minting 1964 dated coins using this silver. Now, why are they doing that? Trying to draw down the silver, but they're also looking to end even using silver in the making of coins. They figure if they mint boatloads of these coins, they won't be worth anything. And remember, the United States had a 1.3 billion ounce silver stockpile. So what's happening now is they're going to flood the market with 550 million ounces worth of dimes, quarters, and $50. And then in, I think it was July of 1965, they announced, guess what? We're not going to make coins anymore in silver, thus ending any tie to silver whatsoever. So you went from a bimetallic standard where all silver could be brought to the government, minted into coins, to a concession of, well, we'll mint silver dollars and we'll issue silver certificates, to a lot of pro-mining action from 1918 to 1934, where the Nevada mines would be required to mint a lot of coinage for the U.S. at above market prices. And then, of course, Nevada became less important politically because they drained their mines. The Comstock lode, was pretty much gone. And Nevada became less of a silver producer, and they had less political power. And by the time Kennedy came along, it's like, what's this silver stuff doing? We don't need a silver certificate program. It's valuable for industry. Back then, it was good in photography. It was still good in electronics, still good in metal soldering of pipes, still good in production of plastics, and a lot of mirrors. A lot of things back then required some military hardware, and Kennedy did not want it in, and the Congress didn't either. They voted with him. They demonetized silver, except Kennedy had kept it in the coins. But you can tell his plan was to deplete the silver program, the silver certificate program allowance of silver, move that into coins, and at some point, once that happened, then they would start to see a silver shortage, even though they had the 1.3 billion ounces, because again, it was too valuable for industry, he said. Now, 1964, they mint all those coins. By 1965, Johnson then announces, quarter is a quarter. Whether this precurses Nixon's 1971 speech when he tried to say the dollar was the dollar not because it was backed by gold, but because the dollar is backed by the strength of the U.S. economy. Well, Johnson already prefaced in 1965, he was saying that the quarter is a quarter because it's a quarter, not because it's got any type of silver in it. And he got away with it. And not only did he get away with it, he warned people. I'll read to you what Johnson had to say. Our present silver coins won't disappear, and they won't even become rarities. Now, why is he saying that? Well, because they just minted 550 million ounces worth of silver coinage. We estimate that there are now 12 billion. He sounds like Flimsy Graham. I repeat, more than 12 billion silver dimes and quarters and half dollars that are now outstanding. We'll make another billion before we halt production. They were making 1964 dated coins well into 1965. And they'll be used side by side with our new coins. Since the life of a silver coin is about 25 years, we expect our traditional silver coins to be with us in large numbers for a long, long time. Then he issues his warning. If anybody has any idea of hoarding our silver coins, let me say this. Treasury has lots of silver on hand, and it can and will be used to keep the price of silver in line with its value in our present silver coin. Wow. There will be no profit in holding them out of circulation for the value of their silver content. Now, most people listened to him and said, okay, I have a 1965 clad quarter, and I have a 1964 silver quarter. I think I'll spend the 65 quarter, and I'll keep the 64 quarter. And that's what people did. But you can see what happened is they got rid of, and this was Johnson knew, 1965. He was later going to send 500,000 troops to Vietnam. He was going to unveil the Medicare program. He was full on guns and butter, not guns or butter, full-on welfare and warfare state, and it wasn't going to fly, that they were going to have to back their money with silver. And clearly, by the time he was gone and Nixon was in office for a couple of years, Nixon realized, I can't keep up this gold standard stuff either, and that effectively ended the silver standard in the U.S. Totally, it had been demonetized starting as early as 1853 when they didn't allow people to bring in silver and get half dimes, quarters, and half dollars minted. It totally demonetized it in 1873 when they said you can't bring any silver here and get dollars made. Then there were some concessions in 1878 where they said, well, we'll mint silver dollars because we've got a lot of silver. We'll start this silver certificate program. We'll let you mint more silver. We'll let you melt down 270 million Morgan dollars in 1918 just so you can mine more silver so we can replace those 270 million Morgan silver dollars and later peace silver dollars. And then in 1934, they realized they still needed a lot of silver to make coins again, and the U.S. went on a silver buying spree. And by 1961, Kennedy came in, and he was emphatic that silver should not be in this. And then it was shocking for a Democrat, for those who had memories at the time, for a Democrat to come in and say silver serves no monetary purpose, none, other than to make coins. And he really wanted to get rid of that silver certificate program, and he pretty much did. His Treasury Secretary was against it. They were all against it, and they killed it in 1964, and they killed the silver in the coinage in 1964. And that ends the sad chapter of silver in the United States. And then gold's chapter ended in 1971. However, the U.S. still holds a certain amount of gold, not only in Fort Knox, but in other locations. The U.S. sold off its strategic silver stockpile in the 1980s. So the United States has no pretension of having any silver. When people make up stories about the United States has no gold at Fort Knox, okay, you can't prove they do, you can't prove they don't, but they don't say they sold it. Where silver, they said flat out they got rid of it, they sold it. fact, I have a silver bar somewhere that says from the strategic silver stockpile. The United States clearly, and a Democrat did it. It was Kennedy and Johnson. They're the ones who put the nail in the coffin, and then the silver stockpile was eventually sold off. So silver has been completely demonetized by the United States, and most countries too. Most countries, I think by 1968, Canada got rid of silver in their coinage. The Swiss got rid of it in the early 70s. France in the 60s. Australia, I think, in the 60s. England in the 60s. All of them got rid of silver in their coinage. India and Mexico a little later on, they still had some coins even in the 70s made out of silver. All right, well, I want to see what you guys think of all this, but it's a piece of research here. It's worth going back and listening to the gold cross, gold versus silver, rich versus poor. But let's see what you guys are saying. All right. Yeah, Jack is talking about people stealing catalytic converters out of cars for the palladium. Yeah, makes sense. Joe Lazar, I've already got a Smaulgld Super Classic mug on the way. It'll be good for morning tea. Smaulgld helps people wake up. LOL. Jack AG, great handle. Pablo Pina. Wow, I'm getting me a game changer mug that can't be forked or copyrighted, such as a hyper classic super mug. Yeah, where is Roger Henley? He's not here peddling his plastic Smaulgld knockoff. And there is your link to the Smaulgld game changer. Pablo Pina. This is Jack saying this. Remember 2008, all the crime and insurance scandals? Remember in Vegas outskirts, there were hundreds of torched cars for insurance money. Funny. All right. You guys are talking about Brexit and the Queen. I covered that earlier today. They're saying that if there's a hard Brexit, I don't know, they're anticipating massive riots, and they might have to use contingent plans to usher the Queen out of Buckingham Palace. Pablo, I can see that she'd be waving too with a Smaulgld mug in her hand. The new mug, game changer. Yeah. This is a very illuminating show, says Carl Joseph DeMarco. I tried, don't I? Carl, I don't listen to, when I hear these stories that people just lap up and they just repeat. That's the thing. People talk about the alternative media as truth, and it's just as polluted as the mainstream media. They are just as lazy, just as willing to repeat someone else's story and repeat it 16. The Gold Back Yuan is a classic. Gold Back Yuan, game changer. Oh, China's announced. China didn't announce jack, but so many people said it. It got reported there was going to be a gold back yuan. JP Morgan has X amount of silver because someone says so. No one checks into it. No one looks into it. Gold back yuan. Kennedy was killed by the Fed for issuing U.S. notes. See, here's one of them. It's dated 1963. See what Kennedy was doing? He was against debt-based money. No, he wasn't. See, and again, people just repeat it. It sounds good. I always go and look and try to see and find the source material. You actually find the exact opposite in this case. In the gold back yuan, you find there was no announcement. And then the JP Morgan has 810,000, whatever ounces of silver they supposedly have. There's no document that says they have any of it. But people repeat these stories. They're on every channel. And then people say, oh, Lewis, you're the only one who doesn't believe it. Okay, so it must be true if everyone believes something because you've heard it on 27 channels. Just like the mainstream media. They repeat a falsehood or they repeat something that they haven't researched. They don't know anything about it. And everyone just listens and shakes their heads. Yeah, that's what it is. The mainstream media has its sheeple, and the alternative financial media has its sheeple. The problem is the alternative financial media people who follow that stuff actually think that they're immune to being sheeple. Oh, no, I'm woke. Oh, I'm listening to the Truth Channel. Yeah, I'm listening to, the bankers and the Rothschilds are out to get us, and they killed Kennedy, and they're going to have a gold-backed yuan and China's going to crush the dollar and it's going to be end of dollar hegemony in a multipolar world. Hey, it's repeat drivel. Dollar's days are numbered. The dollar collapse. All right. Yes, Kennedy tried to warn us about the Fed for other reasons. Yes, Kennedy warned clearly, the CIA had to be totally against Kennedy for the Bay of Pigs. They planned an invasion of Cuba, and Kennedy backed out at the last minute. I'm not saying that Kennedy was was pro deep state or anything, but the point was with the Federal Reserve notes. In fact, I have a quote here. There was a thing about John Kennedy, and he was notorious for not knowing the difference between monetary and fiscal policy. So he wasn't interested in this concept of ending the Fed. He didn't even really know what it was. He just knew he did not want silver to be a monetary metal. All right. Now, what else do we got here in the dashboard? By the way, tomorrow I'm going to do a thing on copper and nickel. And that will be real eye-opening to you as well when you see the numbers on copper and nickel. Which, by the way, are money. Have been money for thousands of years. Medium of exchange, as we'll see, store of value. All right. Removing from pennies 20 years before price rise. How can they know that far in advance? Yeah. All right. William, one thing we know is Kennedy was off. Yeah, as I said, I don't have a problem entertaining plausible conspiracy theories. As I said, you can say it was his wife, pissed off that she was cheating on him. You could say it was Nixon. You can say it was Bush. You can say it was Johnson. You could say it was the CIA. You could say it was the mafia. You can say it was Cubans, Russians. They all had a motive. The Fed had no motive. He was doing their bidding. He was getting rid of the silver certificates and replacing them with Federal Reserve notes. So that one I don't want to entertain. The only way you can entertain it is if you mix up your facts. And you start ascribing an act that Kennedy took to issue the red note U.S. notes as somehow being an attack on the Fed when it wasn't. Those notes had been around since 1878. They were issued from time to time under every president and every secretary of Treasury. They were even issued after Kennedy was offed. That there's nothing in that story. He was not issuing those notes as a challenge to the Fed. Now, if you can show me something else where he challenged the Fed, then I'm all ears. But this clearly was not that. But people want to believe that, because they don't want to look past what these notes were. All they see is, oh, you see, they are not debt-based notes. They are not Federal Reserve notes. What Kennedy wanted was a debt-free society. He wanted debt-free money, so he issued these U.S. notes. Isn't it interesting that Kennedy issues debt-free notes and then he dies 2 days later? Ha, see, the Fed killed Kennedy. That's nonsense. But you want to believe it? You can believe it, but there's no factual basis to it. I know Kennedy was killed by the lead. I don't care what they said in the books. Okay. Now, you see what happened to Jack. He's probably believed this for so long that the Fed killed Kennedy that he took off. He doesn't want to hear it. Here's what he says. I'll go now. I know Kennedy was killed by the elite. I don't care what they said in the books. Okay. But do you care what a U.S. note is? Do you care when they were invented in 1878? Do you care that they were not a JFK initiative? No, I have to care. They have to be a JFK initiative because Kennedy challenged the Fed and then the Fed killed him. That is what I know. That is what I've heard for 20 years. It's very interesting when people want to believe or have believed something. They don't want to hear facts that contradict it. All right. Nixon got us out of Vietnam. That is true. Vietnam War did not happen shortly after Kennedy passing. What's interesting? Yeah, all this stuff, I mean, you could talk forever about. I'm not going to get into all the when Vietnam started, who started it, false flag, but there's a lot of stuff there. All right, let's see. Morning Mayhem. Yes, you need a mug. If I were you, I mean, depends on whether you're interested. What I would do if I were you, Morning Mayhem, is we have a number of mugs. We have the super classic and the classic mug to the right. I would start there because when you buy those mugs, I ship them out directly. And currently I have Smaulgld game-changing mugs. You go to smaulgld.com, you can order them directly. I ship them out. Now, we have other mugs that you can order from the Smaulgld store. You can go to the Smaulgld site, but that takes you off-site, and they will ship to you say a travel mug, an espresso mug. But we have a series of mugs, and I've taken mug shots of them that you can order. There's some really a beautiful beer stuff. You can buy you can buy them all. Some people have bought many of them, and you can stack them. But and mugs are real wealth. But here's the Smaulgld mug shots of some of the other mugs. Here's the beer stein. That is a hefty 22 ounces. And that is a beautiful piece of ceramics there. You can defend yourself with that mug. You can open carry that in many states. But it is a beautiful mug. That's available at the Smaulgld store. Another Smaulgld mug shot is this is the 16-ounce frosted beer mug. Again, you put that in the freezer, a little water on, you get double frosting. Very nice mug. Again, it's smaulgld.com. Now, if you've got a pet, you can get the Smaulgld pet bowl. We have a lot of people send us pictures with their Smaulgld mugs and their dogs. Very cute. No one sent a cat picture yet. So those are your Smaulgld mug shots. But here is a Smaulgld glass mug shot. This is a Smaulgld shot glass mug shot. You can see that. We have those. And remember, once you start buying Smaulgld mugs, you are leading the Smaulgld mug life. And there it is. It's cool to like mugs. All right. Pet food dish looks classy. All right. William Berkman. Lincoln printed greenbacks without interest when faced with 20% interest. Yes, that's right. Now remember, there's an issue. TV Stupid's not going to send me a picture of his cat with his mug. All right, Morning Mayhem. Then you can order the Smaulgld Classic and Super Classic mug. It comes with a personalized note. And for a limited time only, you get the Smaulgld Game Changer Eraser. That's the old version of Alt, Control, Delete. It's the way you erase handwritten things. All right, now, William, I want to discuss this at another point. This is a good topic of discussion here. Lincoln printed greenbacks. A lot of people think that what Kennedy was doing, which he wasn't doing, he had to issue a certain amount of U.S. notes. But by doing that, that's better than the Federal Reserve issuing notes. Because the Federal Reserve is debt-based. Okay. When Lincoln issued greenbacks and when the Continental Congress issued just paper currency out of thin air, if it's not backed by anything, that's, in some respects, as dangerous and as bad as Federal Reserve notes. I'm not putting aside the Federal Reserve as an entity. I'm talking about a debt-based dollar being issued. Because you can issue unlimited amounts of U.S. notes. That's the purpose. By statute, they were limited. But in theory, you can issue as many notes as you want. If you don't have a statutory limit, you just issue them. They're not backed by anything, and that's inflationary. Just as the Fed can be inflationary, they borrow money, and they issue the note. So that's an important discussion to have. I think if you're going to issue notes like people think Kennedy issued, it's a very small amount, and you can buy them. I actually have one. Where do you think did I show you the picture? Did I even show you the picture of those notes? Because if I didn't, I clearly did a disservice. I think I didn't show you the picture. See, I bought one of these. They cost me like $7. They're not rare. But let me show you the picture of a U.S. note. They're not rare at all. I can't believe I did not show you that picture. Very important picture. I showed you the silver certificate. I remember doing that. But the, yeah, let me show you the note. Like, supposedly got Kennedy killed. There it is. All right. I might have shown you this. Yeah, I did show you this. I remember looking at it on the screen now. The U.S. notes with their distinctive red seal were issued from time to time by the U.S. Treasury from 1878 to 1963. Look at the dates. They were issuing them before and after the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. But there they are. They're cute looking. They say U.S. note. You can buy them. In fact, I wrote an article. I linked to them. And I think it's like $7 or $8. They're nice to have, though. All right, back to the comments, and then we got to go. We got to go. All right, I think that's it. So I'll leave you with that. We'll see. Remember, we do this each and every night around 7:30. Sometimes we do a little earlier in the day. We do a little earlier. We go on. Today we went on at 5. If there's important news or we got to do some catch up, I'll do a live stream earlier in the day. Europeans like that one. And but generally we're on here every night. Try to do 365 days a year other than certain holidays. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Tomorrow we're going to do nickel and copper as real money.